We talked about psychopaths. Okay, so let's wander down that path just for a minute. So imagine that the patriarchal structure is predicated on nothing but power. Okay, and then imagine that psychopaths are particularly cunning users of power. Okay, so then to the degree that the social system is an expression of power, you'd expect psychopaths to be radically successful. But they, in human population,
temporarily successful.
Well, they also never exceed. Their numbers vary between 1% and 5% in the population. Never gets higher than 3 is really the upper limit, but it can get up to 5. So they're not that successful because 97% of people aren't psychopaths. So just that fact alone indicates that there's something wrong with the power claim. Now, you might say, well, psychopaths aren't very good at utilizing power. It's like, no, wait a minute. Actually, psychopaths are better at utilizing pure power, stripped completely of empathy, than anyone else by definition. So they are literally the power users who lack compassion. So why aren't they radically successful in human populations? And the answer to that is, well, because our hierarchies are not fundamentally built on power, and our concepts and perceptions aren't fundamentally a consequence of power or its misuse. Now, that doesn't mean that our perceptions and our social structures can't be, and our intimate relationships, our relationships with ourselves for that matter, can't become contaminated by the excess desire for power and by the deceit that might be employed, let's say, in its service. That obviously that happens, and we have to keep our eyes open all the time about that. But the central claim is, not only is it unbelievably cynical and destructive, and also extremely helpful if you want to demonize your enemies. Because if I believe that the entire basis of your perceptual structure is will to power, and
this is part of my pause when I listened to Maajid Nawaz on Joe Rogan, is he keeps going back to the stuff, and it's like, no, I agree with BJ Campbell. It's not that the leaders are simply there desiring power and control. Why do they desire power and control? You get that in a minute. We'll finish this clip.
So is mine, let's say. Well, if you don't believe the same things I do, so if you're trying to elevate yourself in a different hierarchy, or you're trying to produce a different hierarchy altogether, we have nothing in common except our enmity. Because there's no ground outside what you're striving for and what I'm striving for selfishly where we can meet as reasonable people and have a, soul-to-soul discussion.
And I would, sort of jump on Vervaeke's bandwagon about reason, that meet as reasonable people. What on earth do we mean by that? Well, to, again, reinforce the point that Peterson is making here, we're having a common language. We have enough commonality in goal. Maybe we can have a win-win. And so you look at Europe and it's like, well, maybe if we don't have a war, we can have win-win. And to some degree, the West thought, oh, surely they're on the same page as us. Well, apparently not so much, okay? Not so much with Putin. And now Europe is going to have to recalculate its defense budgets and its priorities, and very well, Putin's move might give him what he doesn't want, which is a Europe that rearms and stiffens itself, because, the United States has two oceans to think about, and it's in the other side of the world looking at China and Taiwan and Korea and all of those interests. So, Europe's going to have to put on their big boy pants and decide if they're going to look deep into Putin's eyes. Well, didn't help George W. Bush too much, because saw into his soul. Not so much. So let's let Peterson finish.
That's not even technically possible within that scheme. And so that means that if you and I are enemies, well, what am I supposed to do with you? Because all you are is will to power. I can't trust you. I can't reason with you. Reason doesn't even exist. You see echoes of that in the claims that rational discussion or something like that is, especially the dialectical forms, is somehow a construction of white supremacy, implicit in our social structures. It's so shallow, that idea, and the idea that our virtues, first of all, that there aren't any virtues, but even if there are, they're only derivable from power hierarchy structures. God, that's so cynical and so destructive and so dangerous. And imagine just living with that notion that that's what motivates everyone, is nothing but like an untrammeled will to authoritarian power. God, that's hell, man.
Yeah, you mentioned the word use multiple times, and that is one of the reasons why I try to analyze it more philosophically toward the end, because I don't think that this is, some people would say what we need is dialogue. You'll hear this many of the times. It would come from people who are on the center right, center left. They'll say, we just need to speak to each other more. But I think what comes prior to speaking is we need to value the same, we need to be oriented in the same direction.
Yeah, well, that's again what this new book that I'm writing is about.